Hello, hello. What's going on, y'all? Hey, hey. Hello, hello. Oh, let me turn my volume down here before we get a wicked feedback loop.
Yeah,
Hello, hello.
working on that myself.
Hi, y'all.
There we go.
Hey, hey. All right. We are live here. We're live in Zoom. We're live on YouTube. We're live in Zoom with our Open Studio members, and we're live to the greater YouTube. But we're taking questions here about transcription. And with us here, we have our rockstar transcribers from our Open Studio family. Just an amazing set of musicians in their own right, but who have done such great work for us over the last couple of years. And we just wanted to kind of put names to faces and just introduce you all to our members and to our online community. So give it up first for Charles Nesbitt, who's a great drum transcriber. He's done all the drum stuff for us for, I don't know, maybe a year now, Charles? Maybe a
Yeah,
little
something like
longer?
that. Maybe a little bit longer.
Yeah. Wade Ridenour, great pianist, originally from Missouri. You're from like mid Missouri, right, Wade?
Yeah, I'm from a town called St. James.
Right.
Yeah.
But like that's like a Scott Joplin town, right? Isn't that like a
Yeah, it's I mean Scott Joplin lived in Sedalia for a long time, which is maybe a couple hours from there, but yeah.
nowhere? So nowhere close, basically. So.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
And then from New Orleans, Louisiana, we have Josh Paxton, amazing pianist. Josh, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Josh does his primary focus for all of our jazz piano method members here is the jazz piano method. He's been doing those transcriptions for a while, and he's done other stuff for us too. But I think Josh, that's mainly been what you've been doing for the last several months, right?
Yeah, just a little over a year now, I think.
A little over a year now. Very cool. And then I'm going to count myself as one as well because I was the original Open Studio transcriber. That's why I started working here to transcribe some guitar stuff for Peter Sprague's course, and then moved on to do. I did all of the first rhythm section fundamentals course, and a lot of I did all of Keezer's stuff at first, and spent a good, really paid my dues for the transcription thing. And then we started getting so big and having so many courses and got such a positive reaction from all the transcription that we had on the site that we knew that we wanted to expand what that was. And so we started putting calls out to members or just the general public of who wanted to do this for us. And really, and even I think with Wade, it was just I knew you and I knew you would do a good job and reached out to you personally. And we have a stable of maybe for piano, we probably have 6 to 10 sort of go-to folks. And then really three that are the superstars. Max Gamiz, who actually has his own like transcribing YouTube channel. He's way into it. And he's in Mexico and he couldn't be here today, but sends his regards. And then the two pianists with us today, Josh and Wade, who take really, if I have something that I'm like, ugh, that's gonna be rough, I send it your guys' way. So
Yeah,
apologies. And then who started Charles, who started with us with, I think, Charles, the first thing we had you on was the Brazilian rhythm section.
Yeah, that was the first thing.
Yeah, that must have been like, oh, this should be easy because that's kind of the same grooves over and over again.
It
And
yeah,
then,
it it didn't change at all. It was pretty straightforward.
well, then, yeah, exactly. And then I was like, huh, this guy's pretty fast, pretty good. I'm gonna send him this Gregory Hutchinson solo and see see if he can handle it. And it was so accurate that we started designing courses with Charles in mind as far as like, well, we can do this now. We can have transcription on the drums, and it's going to be just like incredibly accurate and really well done. And he's so great to work with. So, man, so happy that you've been a regular part of our transcribing family. And thank you all actually for the work that you've done for us. You know, we get and you probably don't see a lot of this, and that's on me for not sharing it with you, but we get so many positive comments about your transcriptions and the work that you do. And it's a huge part of our platform. And so we're just so grateful for the work that you do. And I know our members feel the same way. Is that Jerome on here too? Is that Jerome Glope? I can't see your last name, because if so, Jerome has done a bunch of transcribing, piano transcribing for us too. Give me a shout out in the comments if that's you, Jerome. If not, welcome. Anyway, all right, so we're just going to take some questions here. We're going to field some questions in Zoom from our members. You all will obviously get preference, and then we'll take some questions too from YouTube. So if you have any questions about transcribing, if you've ever run into roadblocks about transcribing, or wanted to ask people who do a lot of it, how do you do it efficiently? How do you do it effectively? How do you get the most out of what you're hearing? What tools do you use? That kind of thing. Now is your chance. So you can go to the participants window and you can raise your hand. There's a button there to raise your hand. Then I can bring you on here if you're in Zoom. If you're in YouTube, obviously just use the live chat, and we can go from there. We actually have one question already from YouTube, and it's from Nicholas, and he says, I have a question. Is learning solos out of a transcription book bad for you? Now, in order to not put my bros here out of business for transcribing for us, we'll start by saying that there's nothing particularly wrong with seeing the transcription of a solo. There's nothing bad about reading it and getting that information. But I'd like to hear everybody here's thoughts on reading improvised material like a solo versus transcribing it. And Charles, let's start with you.
Me personally, when it comes to reading, I'm a learner who needs to both see and hear things together. It's helps me internalize the information a little bit better. And when it comes to like looking at an improvised solo, personally, I don't typically learn entire solos. I'll take a little bit of chunk and try to expand on it some kind of way. But I do like writing things out because it allows me to better manipulate it instead of having to think about shifting something over to the right or to the left by a 16th note or an 8th note or something like that. If I can write it out, then it's easier for me to process that kind of, to make that process a little bit easier for me, shifting it to the right or to the left, or if I want to take it and turn it into, if it's 16th notes and I want to turn it into 8th note triplets, it's easier for me to make that thing happen by writing it out. But I don't see any issue with having it written out for the specific purpose of being able to manipulate it a little bit easier.
Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of thing.
So it's kind of in your own personal growth, you kind of use this combination where you're leaning on listening, obviously, but
yes,
then seeing it helps. I think we hear that a lot, that people, especially visual learners, like to see it a little bit, and you do get something, especially rhythmically, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and then when it comes to listening, then you really hear how the guys phrase the how it sounds. You can't just look at it and not hear it and come anywhere near close to what it sounds like in the end. So for me, both are very good. I can't just lean on one without the other too much.
Josh, what do you think? Do you have any thoughts on listening and learning something by ear versus writing it out right away?
I'm a strong proponent of the both of the above sort of approach. I don't think there's anything wrong with learning a transcription from seeing it written out, as long as you realize that you have to hear it too. If you're trying to go just by the page, you're not going to get the phrasing and what makes it make sense. And when I'm working on something myself, the reason I got good at transcribing, at the writing out portion of it, was really just because my memory was pretty bad. I learned something by ear, and if I didn't have it written down, I'd forget it the next day. So that's what got me started back when I was in college on writing the stuff out. But at the same time, I can tell a lot of times I can tell somebody who has learned something just off the page without paying attention to the recording. I get that. I do a lot of New Orleans piano stuff, and I've done some transcription books of that. And a lot of times I'll hear somebody who's learned something out of one of my books, and I'll go, "Yeah, you learned that off the page, and you never heard the record, did you?" And you can tell.
There's
So
nuance.
you get both sides of that equation.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the things that we like to pride ourselves, even though we're giving you the book, right? The written notes. It's usually corresponding right next to the video with the living notation. Like you can see it as it's being played. So you actually put a sound to the note right away. I mean it's the same thing as like reading along, you know, but I think I agree with you that I think that's important. So for our piano,
what I liked about what you guys are doing is seeing one of your videos and going, "Oh, that's the right way to do it," because that way you get everything at the same time.
yeah, I agree. So Colleen, we're going to bring you on in just a second, but I just want to hit Wade here. So Wade, we've been getting a couple questions already about, for pianists, transcribing voicings. And I know I've been throwing at you this new course, Rhythm Section Workshop, and there's no overhead camera on Peter. And so you are picking out some fairly chunky voicings out by ear. And I know what I kind of do when I have to do that. What's your process for finding harmony, finding thicker chords by ear?
Well, I usually start with trying to just sort of find the skeleton. Usually maybe the top note and the bottom note. And then, I mean, depending on the voicing and how challenging it is to hear it, sometimes I'll just, listen over and over a few times and just try to hear as many tensions as I can. You know what I mean? Just listening over and over until I get it pretty much.
Yeah, trying to hear those intervals. And then there's sometimes where, for me too, it's like you can kind of hear the shape and maybe one thing is not right. And you can hear possibly where that one thing is not right. And then just experimenting where you can change that.
Yeah, definitely. And just playing along with it. And I mean, I'm a fan of slowing down the recordings, if something is challenging and just trying to play along with it. I mean, sometimes maybe you can get like audio artifacts doing that, which can present its own challenge. But in general, just listening over and over, try to get the most basic thing, like the top note of the voicing, bottom note of the voicing, and just keep playing with it pretty much.
I agree.
So,
and I will say too, that what can go a long way too is actually knowing some voicings, right?
absolutely.
Knowing voicings and it's like, oh, he's playing that voicing. That's obvious, right? And you don't have to think about it.
Right, which I feel like actually goes back to like the reading notated, transcriptions. I mean, I think it's actually maybe cool to start out trying to read through some, just because then you get that frame of reference, I mean, definitely be listening the whole time, but I think reading through a few transcriptions before trying to do your own could be helpful.
So again, sorry to put you on hold, Colleen. Colleen put her hand down. I'm coming to you, Colleen, if you still want to come. But I just want to, before we go any further even, maybe this would be a great time while we're talking about this to just kind of go around with the three of you and talk about your technical setup. What do you use to transcribe? A lot of people are asking for, what do you use to slow it down, Wade? And what's your setup when you're transcribing? Wade, if you just want to keep going and jump in there.
Yeah, so like a lot of our transcriptions have been, a lot of the ones that I've been sent have been Vimeo videos. So I've been using the Safari plugin called Fast Forward, or actually I guess it's an extension technically called Fast Forward. And you can assign like your own key commands. So like if you want to fast forward by 10% or slow it down, you can assign a key command to that, and so on and so forth. So yeah.
What about you, Charles? What do you use to, because you're transcribing some fairly fast material that's going by. You can't always see it either, I know.
No, I can't. It's funny. It's like, because I just had to email you about flamenco sketches.
That was the first time, though. Everything else is fun.
Yeah, so for those of you who I did flamenco sketches, Gregory Hutchinson's on drums, and it's all mallets for like the first maybe first minute and a half of the tune, and you can barely hear anything. And with the normal videos, there's cuts and here and there and everywhere. So I had to ask Adam for just a specific camera on Hutch so I could basically transcribe my eyes for the first minute and a half of the tune. Otherwise, I'm using. Actually, I didn't know about that extension, Wade, so I may have to check into that. But what I do if I don't have the ability to download the video, then I will do a screen recording on my iPad and just send that to myself and open it up in iMovie, and then I can manipulate it how I need to if I need to slow it down or anything like that. That's normally what I use in terms of slow things down if I need to, which is depending on what Hutch is doing, or yeah, most of the time it's Hutch that I need to slow down.
Yeah. What about you, Josh? What's your setup look like?
I've usually just download the videos, then use whatever program pops up. I think the one I have now is just your basic QuickTime player. That works pretty good for the stuff like the stuff I've been doing with Peter, where you have the overhead shot, and there's not a whole lot of going back and forth to try to figure out what's going on because you've got the overhead shot of the hands. If there are things that I can't see and the video doesn't help, then I'm a big fan of a program called Transcribe. That's transcribed with an exclamation point at the end. And that's just an audio transcription tool that lets you, it can do all the usual slowing things down, and it lets you set loop points and things like that. For me, if I'm working from an audio source only, slowing stuff down is useful, but it's not nearly as useful as being able to select a specific point in the song as your starting and stopping point, and then just being able to play it over and over with a single keystroke.
Agreed. Just having that flow going where you can just go right back to it and hear it very quickly is very, very helpful. I think we're contractually obligated to mention Anytune here because they're a podcast sponsor. And they're very much like Transcribe and the amazing Slow Downer and all those. I mean, they're all very similar. We like Anytune. You can actually, it uses some audio filters to single out instruments in a very cool visual way. So, but any of those will work. And really, like you said, even a QuickTime player can work great. Or a DAW like GarageBand. If you're familiar with how to set markers and stuff on that, can be pretty simple. Logic I use a lot. For audio.
I was a big fan of Digital Performer back in the day before there
were. I remember that. Cool. Okay, Colleen, would you still like to ask a question? Sorry, it's been. Are you good?
Wade answered my question.
Oh.
He answered
okay.
It. Yeah. It was
Excellent.
just about. I don't know what you listen for first, the bass line but he sort of said the bass and the melody.
Got it.
I have a very hard time hearing. I just have to listen over and over and again. But thank you, Wade. That's what you said.
Yeah. So for people who, we preach transcribing around here so much because we know how important it is for people who. But the thing is when you first start, it's hard. It's not as easy as just reading notes off a page if you're familiar with reading. So, I always try to tell people it's hard, but there's a reason it's a little harder because it is better for you. And I think maybe you guys would agree that the more you do it, it's like anything else. The more practice you put in, the more time and reps you have on it, it gets easier. You start to understand the ins and outs of it. Would you guys agree?
Absolutely. And that's true not only with transcribing in general, but also if there's a particular player that you're transcribing. The first one you do, if you don't know their vocabulary yet, then you're just kind of flying blind. But after you've done some of the stuff and you go, okay, this player tends to use this kind of voicing here and this kind of thing. Like the first one of Peter's I did, I'm not sure what's going on. And the more I've done, I'm like, oh yeah, that's this voicing he uses. And yeah, you sort of know what to expect.
Agreed. Ronald has his hand up. What's up, Ronald?
Hey, can you hear me?
We can.
Oh, great. Hi, Adam. Hi, guys. So great to have you all here. Yeah, I'm just a real beginner when it comes to transcribing. And in fact, I was taking Moody's Mood for Love, and I was taking it off of a sheet and just going through the first 8 bars was just exhausting, just to take it off a sheet and put it onto paper, because you got 30-second notes and all that. So I can't even imagine actually writing that out. But on its most basic level, what I sort of would like is some tips on, like I heard Eaton, Emmett Cohen playing a lot of these great standards that I used to love back in the 70s, right? And stuff by Cedar Walton, and just great players. But that music is not like readily available. So if I wanted to take a song, just the melody line and just the chords and the root motion off of a recording, what would be the tips that you guys could tell me to look for? Like, I was thinking the first thing is you want to find the tonic key, and then maybe you want to discover the root motion, and then start finding the chord qualities. But how would you break it down, like in its most basic level, how I could take a transcription off of recording just for the song melody and the chord movement?
Wade, what do you think, man? How would you do that? How would you learn a new song?
I mean, yeah, I tend to start with the melody, and I mean, even just the time signature, just the building blocks of the song. And yeah, I mean, like you said, Ronald, the bass movement, yeah, then the inner voices. I mean, really, yeah, that's my general process: melody, bass, inner movements, inner voices, and that's usually it for me.
So then sort of from the outside in, right? I mean, you work from the bass to the melody, and then you fill in the voices after you've got that down.
Yeah, that's usually how I would approach it. I mean, sometimes, like, maybe, just from playing different tunes and so forth and transcribing in the past, I might just hear the voicing right away, and in which case, yeah, if I'm like writing it down, I'll just write it down. But if there's something that's really hanging me up, then yeah, pretty much always it's melody, bass, and then just try to catch maybe just a couple notes, a couple inner voices, a couple things in the voicing, and then from whatever back knowledge I have about music theory, just being able to figure out, okay, maybe it's just like a triad over a certain, root note or something like that. But somehow finding a way to notate that or write out the chord. So
And then do you internalize, like I find, like on Moody's Mood for Love, what I find is that if I internalize the line myself, so I can scat it, and I could vocalize it, then when I sit down at the keyboard, knowing now I know the key it's in, it kind of gets easy, because you just kind of can find it by ear.
yeah, absolutely. I think just in general, playing piano and voicings, that, I mean, a fun kind of exercise anyway is just singing the inner voices and things like that. I mean, and even with other things like Bach, or, it doesn't even just always have to be jazz, but yeah, things like that can definitely help.
Yeah, singing, I think, is key for all of the parts. Charles, when you're learning a new tune on drums by ear, what are you listening for? What are you trying? What are the landmarks you're first approaching it with?
I guess my kind of situation is different, because I spent so much time learning and playing piano when I was really young. So I actually kind of take the entire song, and everything that's happened and everything that's happening in the tune. So even
Right. Are you sure you're a drummer?
even the theory makes its way in. So so root motion for me plays a big difference. So it plays a big role, because I'm hearing where things are going. So I may not necessarily be able to right away call out, hey, it's a 2-5 to A flat, but I know what a 2-5-1 sounds like. And
Yeah.
so I can recognize that, okay, we're getting ready to get to the end of a section here or start something new. So when I'm learning a new tune, aside from like, hey, what's the groove in this section? What's the groove in the next section? If that kind of thing happens, after that, I'm actually really paying attention to what's going on harmonically and with the bass especially, because that's leading everybody to wherever everything is going.
So I'm going to switch to some YouTube questions we have, because I'm getting some flack over there for not paying enough attention. But we've had a couple of questions about, we've transcribed the solo, maybe we've written it out, maybe we've memorized it, hopefully both. How do we go about analyzing what we've transcribed? And I'm wondering if we can just hear everybody's process. And this doesn't really relate to what you do with Open Studio, but you obviously have all transcribed a bunch of stuff. What do you do when you want to learn from that? Josh, I'll start with you. You've transcribed a solo. What's your next step?
Probably taking specific bits of it that I like and figuring out what makes them tick. This particular phrase speaks to me. Okay, so I look at the chord quality and the melody that's being played over top of that, how that fits into the tonality, whether it's a very inside thing or whether it's got some outside notes, and how those resolve. And then I find it much more valuable to take something like that and first of all, learn it in all keys and figure out sort of what it implies, instead of just taking this phrase for what it is. Okay, how can I apply what I learned from this to other situations? Like, I know that on this voicing, I can play this outside note but make it resolve to this. Okay, what's another situation I can apply that to? So I would rather get one useful phrase out of a single solo than be able to play an entire solo that then doesn't affect anything else I do.
Wade, what about you? What are you looking for in a recently transcribed solo?
Yeah, it sort of depends on maybe what I'm kind of trying to learn from it. I mean, one thing I've done a lot in the past is like definitely with more linear solos, taking phrases and like seeing where they can fit over different tunes, but then also just doing things like taking the motion of the phrase and then trying to like play around with that, and then maybe changing little notes here and there, and then see if I can make that same motion. Maybe the phrases over like a certain chord, but then finding another type of chord and try to keep the same sort of motion over that. And yeah, I mean, definitely with voicings, it's just trying to find different ways that I can take maybe a voicing or a couple voicings and voice lead them in different directions, things like that. Create exercises.
I was live earlier today on a guided practice session. We were just talking about, sometimes it's not even the notes themselves, but just the general shape of the idea can be very revealing and eye-opening from what the greats, how they shape a line or how they shape a rhythm or how they shape a chord can be just as eye-opening as even just exactly what they played. Charles, we got one here for you, I think. This is from Friday. I always struggle while notating the rhythm that I hear while transcribing. I can play it with the help of my ear, but struggle to notate the rhythm. And I see this actually from when we get sort of, volunteer transcriptions in all the time, or we might use, people are like, hey, I want to try the transcribing thing with you guys, or send us something. And when beginners try it, I think rhythm is actually the hardest for people to notate and make look clean. Can you talk about your process? Your transcriptions look so rhythmically clean and easy to read. Can you maybe talk about some good rules of practice for transcribing rhythm and notating rhythm?
Yeah. First, thank you for the kind comments. I try to put everything to what I call the grid. So I shrink everything down. So I start with what I say the macro. So I listen for, okay, quarter notes. All right, so I got some quarter notes here, then smaller subdivisions, eighth notes, smaller subdivisions, 16th notes, and try to put everything on that grid and counting my way through the smaller subdivisions and seeing where everything lines up, so that way I can notate it. When things start to get tough, like with if there's an odd note grouping, that's something that's a little bit different, and I have to kind of figure out how to work my way through that. Especially like when I did that crazy Hutch solo, that was nuts. There was a bunch of notes just smashed just together, and I had to figure out a way to try and make it make sense. So I just came up with what I figured he was doing, but in terms of everything else that is pretty straightforward, I just try to listen. I try to, like I said, to make myself a grid and count along and figure out where everything falls uh, along that grid, and then put it on paper.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Is actually just kind of seeing, like you said, the macro beats, and it gets easier to see on the grid the micro beats.
Yeah.
Make it happen. So I just noticed Nathan Pence sneaked in here. What's up, Pence?
Yo, how's it going, everybody?
How's it going, man? Nathan Pence is amazing bass player, and really has done the lion's share of all the bass transcription from Christian McBride's Fundamentals of Jazz Bass and Beyond, all the Rubin stuff on Rhythm Section Fundamentals, all the new stuff on Rhythm Section Workshop you've been doing. And so we really have the cream of the crop in here now because we have all the instruments represented. So we were just kind of talking about everybody's process, Nate. And so I'm wondering if you could just chime in on when you're setting out to, transcribe, for instance, this Reuben Rogers, like you're doing the complete thing, the bass line, the solo, everything. What is your process? What does your setup look like? How do you first approach a transcription for the bass?
Yeah. So when I'm doing the, well, first of all, great to be here. It's great to see everybody that I never get to see. So that's cool. Yeah, thanks for having me. So when I sit down to transcribe Reuben Rogers, or when I sat down to transcribe Christian McBride, my setup really is just me and my laptop in my ears. Every once in a while, I'll go to the piano to make sure I heard something right. But yeah, for the most part, it's great because you can see what's happening as well. So the visual aspect helps a lot when I'm transcribing. But yeah, I mean, trying to think anything specifically. I mean, as far as transcribing bass lines, it's something that I do pretty often and have been doing for a few years now. So, Reuben Rogers and Christian McBride played obviously great lines all the time that most of them I recognize because, you can really tell who their influences are, and, everything kind of connects that way. But yeah, I mean, I'll usually just sit down, try to do like an hour or so a day, sit down and just kind of try to knock it out. One thing I was noticing, one of the hardest ones I've done was Reuben Rogers solo on Flamenco Sketches. It was a ballad. Super difficult. It was kind of what Charles was saying. What's up, Charles?
Hey, what's happening?
Yeah, it was what he was saying. Is like there's like a bunch of information that like it's funny. Like some of the things that like Peter Martin, Reuben Rogers, Gregory Hutchinson, it's not like it's helpful that it's notated, I feel like, but the point of it isn't so that it's notated and we practice it by looking at the notation. I feel like the notation and I've just been noticing this for myself recently, like the notation can just as easily take you down the wrong road as it can, help you out. Because if you're using the notation just as and you read the notation, you're like, okay, great, I'm done. It's like you've completed, in my opinion, you've completed like the first 10% of the process. Because I'll never forget watching those. I mean, I still go back to them, but when I was watching the Christian McBride videos and transcribing those, I remember one of the things he stressed a lot about transcribing was trying to cop the feel of what was going on. And so I've really tried to make that a huge part of my transcription process. anyways, I kind of derailed there for a second, but
It's good.
yeah. Yeah, when I was doing the flamenco sketches, it was like this like crazy incredible line that Ruben Rogers would play like all up and down the bass, and I was like, okay, he plays this note on this beat and this note on the and a 3.
Yeah. Something is happening in between those.
Yeah. And I can kind of tell what it is. So
Yes.
I'm just gonna do my best and cram it in there and see. And it ends up looking really cool. It looks like you like totally nailed it, but like you definitely, it's whatever.
So this actually leads to a question we're getting on YouTube, which I think is relevant to something that you and I were just kind of corresponding about last week, Nathan, and Charles, we've corresponded about a similar thing. And that's, what do you do when the player you're transcribing is laying back? Because the players we're transcribing are not on a grid. They're human beings, and they're messing with the time, especially when you're getting into a ballad, right? Like flamenco sketches, you both have mentioned. But not everything is going to be on the grid. And especially when they get to the solo and it gets notey. I did, for the first rhythm section course, I transcribed Peter's stuff on Sophisticated Lady. And I thought I was going to go crazy for a week because it was just all these fast, out of time lines, and it's like, where do you line that up? So I'll kind of start with this one, and then I'd love to hear anybody chime in. But when something is kind of either, even like you're saying behind the beat, but if it's just not on the grid, right? Like if it's not clear that it should be somewhere, how do you approach notating it? How do you approach transcribing it? Well, just learning it and trying to put it in your playing is easy because you can, like Nathan was saying, get the feel of it, right? Like Christian was mentioning, like you can really like feel your way through it and be a human with it. Now, if you want to translate that to the page, you've got to do, I think what Pence, you were just kind of alluding to is that like you find the landmarks and that are on, like, this is definitely on beat, the end of 3. Like that's got to be right. Yeah. Just because of what the hi-hat did or something, like it's got to be on the beat. And then find the nearest starting and ending point wherever you can. And then, obviously get the notes that you can in between, and then try to, in some kind of tuplet form or some kind of way to line it up so that it lines up. And if you have to go into 7 or 13/9 or whatever those things are that look crazy in Sibelius, that's what you got to do. But you just have to make it so that information is there in that space of time. And that's kind of how I approach it. And I try not to get actually too precious about like dun 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 dun. And if the playback is somewhat close, I'll be like, okay, you should be listening to this, because those human moments are what make music great, that some things just will never be on a perfect grid. And it's kind of futile to like translate them in that way, I think. What do you think, Charles?
Yeah, I agree with that same kind of process, figuring out where something starts and where something ends. And then you just kind of have to make decisions about what goes in between and really do your best to notate that. But that's the reason why it's very cool that you guys have this stuff with videos. And then that's another reason why we've all been talking about it being very important to listen to the transcription instead of just trying to learn it from a page, because what we have to do when we're looking at transcriptions is we have to interpret them, but we have to interpret them based upon the information that we're getting with our ears or with our eyes in this case, when we're looking at the video. So it's the same kind of thing, just I'm looking for the end, I'm looking for the beginning, and then figuring out how I can best represent what's going on in between these two landmarks. Same thing with if it's some kind of crazy tuplet or if it's a triplet. I go through it. I went through it with flamenco sketches for sure, and because Hutch was just, it was texture. So Nathan was talking about flamenco sketches, and he could see Hutch and see the mallets, and it's just the texture. Hutch is not really playing. He's not playing solid beats. Now I had to find, okay, this is on the end of one, and this starts here, and this starts there, but everything else was just like, okay, well, I'm just doing the best that I can with this and doing my best to represent what's happening on the page. And that's it when it comes to that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I had one thing to add to that.
Please.
If we have time, I don't know if you have more questions
Yeah, go
online
for
or
it.
whatever,
Please.
but yeah, I mean that's a reason I feel like in my own practice, I kind of established a rule for myself recently. Um, everybody has more time, so I'm kind of trying to figure out things I can do to fill up the time. And like one thing I realized that was really great was I told myself before I play a transcription that I'm working on, I'm going to listen to it 2 times. So that's been a really cool thing for me because it kind of goes with what Charles was talking about with like, it's, he was just playing colors and textures, and, that stuff maybe is maybe in my mind categorized in the section of like, these are things that you just internalize through listening. And it might not be part of the solo that you write out when you're doing your own transcriptions. That's a cute dog, Adam.
Thank you.
Yeah.
He's very.
That might not be a part of the transcription that I notate, but can still be a part of my playing. I can still cop the feel of that. I can still make that a part of my musical vocabulary.
Nathan, while we got you here, we have a question specifically to you from Alejandro. And I think after this, I'll hit you up for this, Josh, because I know you do a lot of New Orleans stuff and probably lift a lot of older stuff. The question is for Nathan, what do you do when you want to lift an older solo that probably wasn't recorded all that well? Which I would imagine it can be a problem for pianists for sure, but I would even imagine more so for bassists.
Yeah, totally. This is really funny that he said that. First of all, before I answer that, try to buy this. It's called How Low Can You Go? It's the string bass anthology from 1925 to 1941. And what this company does is they go around to people's houses in America and, well, I guess all over the world, maybe, I'm not sure, but they go around to people's houses that have these old records and they digitally record every, like these old lost records that we didn't know about or something. And they put, I mean, this is like the most incredible thing I've ever found recently. It's really cool. And because I always say that because the recording quality is extremely, extremely great. So, but yeah, as far as like figuring it out when it's bad recording quality, I think a couple of things. One thing, knowing the musician that you're transcribing, or in this case, a bass player, knowing that bass player's vocabulary can really help, because I think somebody, it might have been Josh, was saying this earlier. That can really help when you kind of know what to anticipate, what this person might have played or not. And yeah, I mean, there's some parts where, like, I've been transcribing a lot of Jimmy Blanton lately, and in 1939, the recording quality just isn't that great. But really, for me, I try not to stress about it too much, because what it ends up being is maybe 10% tops of the notes. It could be this note or it could be that note. But you just kind of play around with it, play what like fits the best in that moment. Play your 3 choices in that little section, and see if you can get something that sounds decent.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be exact if there's no clear answer. What about you, Josh? How do you approach that for old piano recordings?
It can be tricky for sure. A lot of times it really just comes down to a matter of guesswork. It's either, okay, it could be this or it could be this. I really have no way of knowing which is which, so I'm just going to take my best guess. There are little tricks you can use. If the low end is muddy, something I found that counterintuitively works a lot of the time is if you can use whatever audio software you're using to raise the pitch an octave, that'll make the low end a lot easier to hear. Sort of take the problem you have if anybody used to use half-speed tape decks back in the day. That of course makes the low end super muddy. But then if you play it back twice as fast, so it's up an octave, of course it goes by twice as fast if you've got it locked to that speed. But that can actually make the low end a lot more clear. So you can hear, oh, this is actually the bottom note. I thought it was this, but it's really a fifth below this.
Hmm.
And as far as other issues of dealing with just really old recordings, there's a lot of going back over stuff. Like if something's giving me problems, I won't just go through it and go, okay, I'm done. I'll go all the way through it and then go back to the very beginning and start again and go, do I still agree with everything I thought I got right? And a lot of times we'll go, oh no, okay, now that I've done this entire tune, I understand that I was hearing this note where it doesn't really exist because it just kind of comes out, you know, the way the frequencies are in this particular recording. And going back through it a second time, you can go, okay, I spotted this mistake I made. Now it makes sense.
Good stuff. Yeah, I like the tip about raising an octave to get the lower stuff. I think is key, and I haven't tried that, but I could see where that would be very helpful, because usually for those old recordings, that's the first thing to go, especially is on the piano. Smurf Papa asks, as someone who's just getting into transcribing, what are the best tips for beginners / what are the biggest mistakes beginners do that I should avoid? Wade, I'll give you this one. What should a beginner transcriber, how should they approach their first few transcriptions?
Yeah, I would say just, find a solo that you really like, that speaks to you, that's not too complicated. If you're transcribing a solo, one that kind of comes to mind is maybe like something like maybe Freddie Hubbard's solo on Driftin', the Herbie tune. Like that's just a very like melodic, beautiful solo, but it's in my opinion, perfect solo, Yeah. And just something simple, and just take it one note, one measure at a time, and I would say, yeah, probably a big mistake then would be being too much of a perfectionist early on. Just try to get as much as you can, and maybe you'll get through the solo. Maybe you'll have every note, every rhythm perfect. Maybe you won't. But then, yeah, if you move on to something else, and over time, as your ears develop, then you can come back to that first solo. Maybe you'll find things that you didn't notice before. And I think it's just an ongoing process, like just developing your ears and developing that skill, So.
Awesome. Charles, what about you? For someone who's just a drummer, maybe starting their journey into transcribing beats and solos, any tips for beginners?
It's pretty much the same kind of tip that Wade gave. You want to start with something, one that speaks to you, that you like, and that you are interested in learning, and then taking it a little bit at a time. My very first transcription that I did, I don't remember how old I was. I think I was still a teenager, but was actually a Gregory Hutchinson solo at the start of a tune called, it's Brian's Bounce off of the Family album. And so I started, I just did the very best that I could. Now it's rhythm, so there's one thing that I didn't have to worry about pitches or anything like that, but rhythm, and taking the rhythms and just laying them out, and then figuring out, okay, well, where is this rhythm now? Is this rhythm on a rack tom, or is it still on the snare drum, or is it on a floor tom or a bass drum? And figuring it all out. And the same thing that Wade said is your ears develop. Like, I go back and look at my transcription now and like, oh, I missed a bunch of stuff in that solo that I hear now after having listened to music for such a long time at this point. So yeah, start with something that speaks to you. Don't start with, YYZ by Rush. Don't start.
Generally, good tip for anything starting. Don't start with YYZ.
Don't start with Neil Peart. But take something simple, not necessarily simple, but something that is, I guess maybe somebody like Philly Joe, who's pretty grounded in rudiments, and his ideas are very clear. You're not gonna hear a whole lot of odd note groupings or anything like that. It's gonna be paradiddles and double paradiddles and flams and flam taps and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I would say that.
All right, so let's go around. We heard from Charles and Wade about their sort of recommendations for beginners to start, and this will kind of conclude here our roundtable. Well, this will be the best way to, I think, end. But let's just kind of go around and maybe some solos that we recommend people transcribe. And this doesn't even have to be just for beginners, but maybe just some like easy to hear solos that give you good information. And I'll start with Herbie Hancock's solo from One Finger Snap from Taken Off, you know, as quote unquote kind of hard of a tune it is, which is really not. But that solo is very clear. It clearly defines the harmony, and the rhythms are easy to hear. And it's just, you get so much information from those few choruses that I always recommend if someone wants more of a quote unquote modern sound. It was like 1961 or whatever. But go check out Taken Off, and Herbie's solo on One Finger Snap, I think is a brilliant, simple solo on a set of changes that are fun to play on. Josh, what about you? If you could recommend a solo for someone to transcribe, where would you go?
God, it's so hard to make a general recommendation like that because it depends so much on people's skill level and what they're interested in. I got a whole lot from transcribing Gene Harris when I was first starting out. I really liked his kind of gospel flavored stuff. I can't think of a specific tune off the top of my head because it's been a while. And then I think the next guy I got really into transcribing was Kenny Kirkland. I know you and Peter deal with him a great deal. His early stuff from those Winton and Branford records, it's definitely not easy. And depending on the tunes, it can be very harmonically advanced, lots of polychords that don't, fit obviously into some sort of functional tonality. But as far as general recommendations, I second everybody's advice to not bite off more than you can chew at first. And that's something you can only know by trying it. A non-piano solo. The first horn solo I ever transcribed was John Handy's alto solo on Goodbye Pork Pie Hat. And
Nice.
yeah, that's to me just one of the most beautiful solos, one of the most beautiful pieces of music ever played in jazz. So
Well, that's a great point. I assume everybody, all our transcribers here, you all, I'm sure, have transcribed many solos from not your instrument, correct? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know I have too. Like it's important, I think, to go beyond your instrument to hear what other people are doing. It's a great point. All right, Nate, what's a good solo you could recommend for maybe a beginner or just anybody, just generally like a good ratio of information to ease of transcription?
Oh yeah, definitely. I have the perfect solo. One transcription I really love doing and something I'll never forget was Ray Brown on The Touch of Your Lips off of Ben Webster Meets the Oscar Peterson Trio.
Yeah.
Ray Brown, in any recording you find of him is always playing the perfect notes with the best feel, so much conviction. The bass lines on that and the solo, he just takes one beautiful chorus. Transcribing Paul Chambers on So What, that's a great one I think for bass players to check out. Actually, anybody looking to get some bass lines in their ears. I would throw those two out.
That's great stuff. Well, I just want to thank our transcribers for not only being here today with us and sharing their experience and their valuable information, but just all the great work they've done for Open Studio. I know our members here on Zoom and YouTube really appreciate it. How about a hand for our brilliant musicians here that help us make the content so great? And thank you all for tuning in and the great questions. We tried to get to as many as we could, and we'll keep this YouTube video up, and so you can go back and reference some of these. And it's just great to put, just like with our members here, it's great to put faces with names and meet some of you officially during this very strange time. And then it's great to see Wade and Nathan. It's great to see you guys actually face to face again. And so thank you all. And yeah, go check out openstudiojazz.com/live for all the live events we're doing. We're doing this is my third one today. So we're doing tons of live stuff. So check us out. We're always live around here. And yeah, have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
Peace.
Yeah. Thanks, Josh. Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Wade. Thank you, Nathan. See you, Ronald. See you, Patrick and Ian. Jerome. See you, Colleen. See you, YouTube. All right. Later, y'all.
Later.
Peace.